Good afternoon. I welcome all who are present today, both those who are here present in the church and those who are watching online or in live streaming. Our Culture of Life ministry discerned that much of the angst in our country in 2020 was related to issues of race. George Floyd's killing shocked us. How could a police officer choke a man to his death and make light of it? But that death, sadly, was not the only time a white officer was responsible for the death of a person of color. In cities across our land, instances of brutality or indifference led to protests and riots. Professional athletes chose not to stand for the singing of our national anthem. Companies began rethinking how their products were branded and advertised. We would like to think that racism and bigotry are vestiges of our past and behind us, but we know that is not the case. Our purpose today is to hear where we have come from and what is still experienced by African Americans today. We believe that as Catholics, every person is created in the image and likeness of God. Each person is worthy of dignity and respect. Yet we know that human sinfulness is still a reality in our individual lives and in our nation. We gather this day to seek solutions to make our world a more inclusive place for all people. We'd now like to invite Father Frank to begin us in prayer.
Please stand. And good afternoon and welcome to all. We place ourselves in the hands of our loving God, who is one who loves all, who cares for all, and who helps us when we seek him. Let us pray. Lord God, creator and sustainer of all things, by your hand you have made humanity in your own image and likeness. All people of every race, color, and culture are your children. Help us this day to appreciate the history and sufferings of people of color in our nation and in our world in the past, their hopes for healing and justice in the future, and the ways in which we all may create a better and more inclusive society in the present. May the Spirit of God inspire us to understand one another and to approach our sharing with truth, openness, and love. Thank you, our caring and all-powerful God, for the opportunity you give us today. Please bless us here and all your people everywhere. We ask this through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Please be seated.
We have invited several people to be part of our panel discussion today to share with us their expertise and their lived experience. Our first panelist is Dr. Patrick Coggins. Dr. Coggins is a professor of education and multicultural education at Stetson University. He currently serves as chair of the Faculty Senate and is a member of the President's Cabinet at Stetson University. He served as a Jessie Bell DuPont Endowed Chair Professor from 1991 to 2011. Professor Coggins is the first Caribbean Guyanese professor and holder of an endowed chair at Stetson. He has had extensive experience designing and teaching courses in cultural diversity, multicultural education, ESOL, social studies methods, and classes on cross-cultural communication. His publications concern confidentiality, fraud discovery and control, cultural competence, and the World War II Tuskegee Airmen. Coggins also devotes much of his time to student and campus organizations. He is the co-founder and co-chair of Alana IA Faculty Caucus and is the advisor to the Black Student Association, the Hispanic and Latin American Student Organization, the Caribbean Student Organization, the Asian Pacific American Students, and serves on a Faculty Senate committee. He is also Florida Commissioner of Education's appointee to the Holocaust Task Force. He advises the Cross-Cultural Center on Cross-Cultural Programs, serves as the campus coordinator of the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and coordinates the Multicultural Alumni Student Awareness Day during homecoming weekend. Dr. Coggins strives to eliminate the academic achievement gap and the implicit and explicit bias between diverse and majority students. by creating an atmosphere of cultural competence between students and faculty while instilling the need to overcome racial, gender, and ethnic barriers that impede living in a modern, multicultural, multiracial society. He will share with us some of the background to where racism in America and across the world has come from. Dr. Coggins.
Thank you, Father. And I thank all of those who put together this day of sharing. Nobody wants to deal with race because it forces you to dig deep inside of you. It forces you to think about Proverbs 6:19 that talks about 6 critical areas that shapes our lives. And basically, if each of us read that and live it within our lives, racism would be of yesterday. As I look at Africa, there's a big lie. Africa has never been in dark ages. The only place that was in dark ages was Europe for almost 1,000 years. Asia was never in dark ages. This impression that Africa is backward does not make any sense. It does not make any sense because when you look at where Europe was and where Africa was doing mummification of the dead. What is that? Preserving the dead. Africa had medical journals. You had Imhotep, who's considered the father of medicine. Look at the architecture. Look at the developments in Africa. Africa still, and somebody said to me, well, Africa has done nothing. If Africa has done nothing, why all the European nations went to Africa? Because Africa had milk and honey, gold, diamond, and resources that Europe did not have. So when we think about the genesis of Africa and why my ancestors came here to the Caribbean and Guyana and all throughout the Caribbean and to the US, you gotta think about another big lie. The big lie is that my ancestors wanted to come here. They did not. How did I know? Their arms were in chains, their neck was in chains, chains around their belly, and chains around their legs, because they would have jumped overboard. They did not want to come here. They were captured. Europeans wanted to come here. They jumped in a boat willingly. Some, like the Quakers and others, were getting religious persecution, so they did not come voluntarily. They were escaping something. A very important marker is 1503. Everybody's talking about 1619, but we did not come here to the Americas in 1619. We came in 1503, and there was a Catholic minister who became Bishop Bartholomew de las Casas. If he just kept his mouth shut, he saw the native Indian population were dying from working from sun up to sundown. No siesta, which they were used to, and he got very depressed and prayerful and told Queen Isabella, get Africans to come here. And that's how they started. The first 100 came in 1503 to Dominican Republic, Hispaniola, Dominican Republic, and Haiti. Africans did not want to come here. Why? Because Africa had what? Milk and honey and was doing well. The second point I want to say, and actually I got into trouble, Pastor, with the bishop when I said it was the Catholic priests, but I'm in the house. I'm in my house, in God's house. I'm a lector, I'm a sacristan. I got to tell you the truth. The truth is the Catholic Church, through its bishop and priest, was involved in bringing my ancestors. Of course, he repented. The Catholic Church has repented, and it's no longer an issue. But I want you to look at Deuteronomy chapter 15, verses 11 through 20. Many people tell me, your race was cursed, and it's in the Bible. I have not found that in the Bible. The only thing I found is Deuteronomy chapter 15, verses 11 through 20, which says, if you have a slave, you should not keep them for more than 6 years. And in the 7th year, you should let them go. If they decide to stay with you, then they become a part of your household. Look at the Joseph story. The Joseph story, he was sold into slavery by his brothers, and he ended up staying. He didn't have to stay beyond 6 years. So the system of enslavement that Europeans enforced on Africans was not coming from the Bible. Don't ever let anybody tell you the Bible talks about it. The next thing I want to basically say is all the Europeans, the genesis that everybody has forgotten is that Europeans were what? They had a rough time here. The Irish was told, you can't bury your dead in the Wasp burial ground. You can't get insurance. You can't go to school. The women on the way to church were beaten up. That's why we started the Knights of Columbus. I was a Grand Knight and past faithful navigator to protect the women, and the churches used to burn these churches down. And what I'm raising this to say, if white folks who are were Italians and who are from Eastern and Southern Europeans who were told that they were inherently inferior and suffered from discrimination and segregation in this society, why should they turn around and not help folks who look like me? Because you went through the same thing. We had to get to our own burial ground, our own schools, and even though we were not causing any trouble. Now, why the Catholic Church? What you're doing today is very important. And why is it important? How many black or African bishops bishops as well as, I would say, popes, do we have in the Catholic Church? Does anybody tell me? Nobody? Huh? Somebody said one. Use your finger. They're basically 3. And what is important about Lent? Pope Victor the First is the one who created Lent. On Good Friday, you had different services. It was crazy in Europe. When he became Pope, African Pope, straightened it out. There was a second African Pope, Militez. And what is good about Militez, he made sure that all the suffering that Roman Catholics and Christians were going through, he made sure that that was resolved. And then the last one was Gelasius. So we had 3 African popes and 1 Spanish one that we have right now that I know of, who is the current pope. So the point is the history of Africans, we've always been what? Integrated in the Catholic Church, very much a part of the Catholic Church. St. Augustine, we founded St. Augustine with the Spanish and with the Native Americans. Yet we get no credit for Fort Mosaic, which defended St. Augustine from Oglethorpe, the British. So why is racism so necessary? And I believe that we had to get a justification for the enslavement of Africans. And the justification was Africans were inferior. No, 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 no. If I was inferior, I would not have a PhD, a JD, a MS, a BS. That means when you're inferior, your brain is not sound. I have not found an African, I have not found an Irish, a German, a British, who is not smart. All racial groups got smart. So this genesis, it's called ethnocentrism. This feeling that you're superior because you took me from Africa, brought me here, subjugated me, and made sure that I stayed in enslavement for over 400 years. We had one of the longest enslavement period. And somebody said, well, in 1896, we got rid of Plessy versus Ferguson. We got rid of Jim Crow. I said, no, Jim Crow is still alive today. It is very creative, but it gets rough because we saw, as the the pastor said, we saw what happened to the brother by the police and the other police officers, but what is more scary for me is when they went to Washington, D.C. and desecrated the black churches in Washington, D.C., when they went to North Carolina and desecrated and killed brothers and sisters in the church, and the government said nothing. That was okay. So when I say that I see Jim Crow, I see the re-engagement, what I call the revitalization of slavery, of discrimination, those are the facts. Now, my perception is the January the 6th deal was because blacks got out and voted. And what the president was asking is for us to what? Change all the black votes in Georgia. So, 4 things that I'm going to stop, because this is a basic course I'm trying to condense. I believe that there are 2 reasons why this is getting out of hand. The first reason is silence. We have been silenced to discrimination against women, discrimination against African Americans and Latinos, etc. We have been silent. Evil only continues if you're silent. If the churches are speaking up like you're doing today, if the good-minded people are speaking up against racism and discrimination, we would not have it. It will change. The second reason is blindness. A lot of my white friends say, well, I don't see any problem. I get along with the black person next to me. I ask them, do you invite them into your house? No. How can you live in the same street and you're not inviting them into your house? Do you invite them to your church? No. Because we know Sunday is the most segregated day in our churches, in our nation. You have black church, you have white church. So I say, until it stops, like somebody said, why are you a Roman Catholic? I'm Roman Catholic because of Victor, because of Milites, because of St. Augustine, who was a brain, and he was 50% white, 50% black. But if you have 1 ounce of black blood, you are black. So I understand that black people, African Americans, have been involved in the church. And let me leave you with 2 things, then I'm going to stop. The second thing about blindness is very dangerous, because evil does not go away if you close your eyes or you turn the other way. Evil will continue. And I'm crying this weekend because my second grandchild with my daughter is in intensive care, and she's a biracial baby. I'm not going to be around to protect her. Why? I see our nation continuing to be a place where they want to make America great again. Making America great again is discriminating against my grandchild, whose skin is going to be brown. It's not going to be white. So I believe that we have an opportunity here in the church, here in our society, to make a difference. And let me tell you how easy it is. When you say to me, I love you, notice the tone. I love you, I'm going to care about you. You're taking 14 muscles. When you said, I hate you, I'm going to get you, you're working yourself up. And you're going to end up doing what? Burning my house, hurting me, etc. Because when your blood pressure gets out of control, you got to what? Act it out. So I'm encouraging you to use common sense. But most importantly, use your Christian. You cannot be a Christian. You should never say you're Roman Catholic and you discriminate against somebody else over another race, over another gender. It does not make any sense. And I'm going to read this and then I'm going to stop. So in closing, as he thinks in his heart, so he is. And I'm going to just change that. That's a direct quote from Proverbs 23, verse 7. As I would say, as she and he thinks in his heart, so he and she is. The greatest revolution of our generation is the discovery that human beings, by changing their inner attitudes of their minds, can change the outer aspect. We got to think forgiveness. We got to think caring. We got to think that every human being is equal, but most importantly, in the sight of God, we got to say that I am your brother. What is the greatest commandment that Jesus said to the lawyer?
Of God.
That's right. Love your brother and sister as you love yourself. So I leave you today. There's only one institution who can make America better, and that's the one I'm standing in, the church. God bless you.
Thank you. Our next panelist is Pastor William Bradley Jr. Pastor Bradley is a man of vision and purpose. He is the founder and senior pastor of New Hope Church of Deltona, established in January of 1993. New Hope Church's vision is to create an atmosphere of hope and encouragement that meets the needs of people. This is done by reaching the lost, teaching the found, and spreading the message that there is no hopeless situation with God. Pastor Bradley started New Hope Human Services in August of 1993 to provide programs consisting of a summer youth camp, education, enrichment, entrepreneurship. There is a housing program that assists with rent and utilities. Hands of Hope Food Pantry gives food to those who are in need in Deltona and the surrounding communities. In 2020, Hands of Hope provided food to 9,800 people. In the year 2020, Pastor Bradley also started New Hope Community Development Corporation. Pastor Bradley's wife, Dot, started the ABC Daycare and Preschool that is housed in the New Hope Church building. Pastor Bradley is a member of the West Volusia branch of the NAACP, where he's on the Religious Affairs Committee, and he's also a member of the Concerned Clergy Coalition of West Volusia. Pastor Bradley is a man of hope. He continuously ends all of his messages with the statement of hope: all of our problems are never bigger than God's power. Keep the hope and keep the faith, because there is no hopeless situation with God. We welcome Pastor William Bradley.
Thank you for this opportunity to stand before you today. And today, my topic I will talk about will be the perspective of dealing with law enforcement and community partners and the challenges that involves a workable solution for the community. Effective partnership between law enforcement and the community and stakeholders are essential for public safety, and it's important that government agencies and community groups, businesses, and private citizens all embrace safety as shared responsibility. And it is true, as we look at law enforcement, they're under heavy scrutiny because of the conditions of our country, of what's going on. And just give you even an example, I know most of us have marveled and just admired Amanda Gordon, who spoke the poem at the inauguration. Here recently, this young girl, as popular as she is, she was looked as a suspect as she was walking to her house by law enforcement. So when you look at the conditions that when you look at law enforcement, racial profiling, when you look at police brutality, when you look at the conditions and the problems that we have, it's just a normal thing that happened, and none of us as blacks are exempt from that. So it is true that law enforcement agencies are under scrutiny, yes, and of course, as the police departments have been asked to reform their operations, they must continue to recognize that law enforcement cannot be effective without establishing partnerships with the community and others. And as we look at some of the challenges, first I want to say, as we look at the conditions of our country, there's a scripture in Proverbs 13:12 says, hope deferred makes the heart sick. And when we look at, as we look at race relationships between law enforcement and the community, and especially the black community, People are sick because hope has been deferred. When you constantly see things that happen, that's why we find as coming together, and that's the challenge. We're talking about the challenge involving workable solutions for the community. I often say before we can produce better results, we must first recognize the results that we're producing. And one of the challenges I see is that when something happens, we come together and let's deal with it. And it's for a moment, but it's not for a movement, that we got to continue to work together to deal with some of these issues. They're not going to go over, they're not going to get resolved overnight. That as we look at the challenges that involve workable solutions, we must realize that challenges are inevitable, but positive change is optional, because people have to make a choice. We have to make a choice to make a change. Because as we deal with issues, serious issues that happen in dealing with people from the conditions that they are dealing with, it's about your feelings, your frustration, and your focus. People, feelings, and what feelings do, they hurt. And when people have dealt with something with law enforcement, they're hurt about it. And then also too, there's frustration, and frustration also hinders the progress of making things better. But our focus will help you. And this is why when it comes to the challenges of involved in having a workable solution in the community, we have to focus on progress. See, law enforcement and community members must develop a positive working relationship in order to build an enduring solution and increase trust between the police and the public. And we have to do that, and it takes concentration. It takes concentration. What is the focus? The focus is not dealing with a situation that may occur, and what happens when something happens in our community, we get upset, then we go back to our own place of comfort and convenience. But problems are constantly going on, and so there must be focus, then there must be communication. Communication, exchanging ideas, and getting information. One of the challenges, I think, everybody have an assumption, and what happens is that every mistake and every mishap we make is because of an inaccurate assumption. And basically that our assumption comes from, our circle of influence. But when we look at these problems that we have to come up with a solution, we have to not only, the concentration is our focus, communication, but we got to collaborate. We got to work together in producing desired results. Persistent pursuit for progress. That's what we need to have, because what happens is that when challenges come and we see it and we're in our place of comfort and convenience, we know we need to change, and we know that we embrace the idea of change. Things need to be better. But here is what we need to do. We all must individually and collectively engage in a process to make it happen. Because without a process, there's no progress. We have a problem, but then we need to really embrace in the process. So we have to have a process to really make things better in our pursuit for progress. Bruce Tuckman, in an article in 1965 on community policing and community partnership, indicated that partnership goes in 4 stages. You have forming, storming, norming, and performing. And the forming is a time that you get together to know each other. Get together to know each other. And here's the thing that, see, different don't mean deficient. Because I look different or I live in a different location, that don't mean people are deficient. And once you get with people and start talking about, everybody want the same thing. But when we break down some of the barriers, some of the racial barriers that we have, and you get with people that are going through. And sometimes we look at and we look down at people because of their condition. But I said hope deferred makes the heart sick. They just need to be in an atmosphere of hope and encouragement. And so once we get with people, that first stage of forming is getting to know people and getting an understanding, because what an understanding will do, an understanding calls you to adjust to any situation. Then when you really understand, you get people together and understand that it's not this, and then it takes individuals to come together to make an understanding. We had an opportunity with the Kurd Coalition. There was a situation we committed ourselves to help law enforcement and the community. There was a situation where this parent was having problems with law enforcement. So the parent contacted me. I went down to the station with them. And there was an understanding that came out of that, and we left with everybody shaking hands. But see, we have to take time to do that. Because we just want to say, this is this and that is that. The law enforcement had an understanding, the parent got an understanding, and we walked out of there with everybody had peace, everybody had hope. That things can work out. Then it's the storming. Now this stage here, the forming is a time to get to know each other, but storming this stage can be difficult, but it's necessary. Because participants begin to share their concerns, and identify their issues and controversy. And a lot of times, I know none of us want to be wrong, but then when you get people come to talk about some of the things that they have experienced, it's very difficult to hear it. But you got to face it, because I believe whatever you don't face, it'll never get fixed. Whatever you don't confront, you'll never conquer it. So as you deal with the issues, this storming is dealing with the concerns and the ideas, and confront the ideas and perspectives. You focus on the goal, avoid distractions, and compromise on key issues. Because the ultimate goal is we want to move together, and we want to really get people feeling better about themselves and their situation. The third one is norming. That's just developing a consensus on many issues and understanding the roles and responsibilities. Because your blessing demands your effort. The Bible says the hand of the diligent shall bear rule. So therefore, we can't disconnect ourselves from the progress of what we're trying to accomplish. And then the last one is performing. Say that all efforts of forming, storming, norming leads to the final stage of development, and that's performing. That's when the participants are all focusing on a shared vision, that there is a goal. I'm different, but I'm not deficient. There's a goal that, yes, I really understand what we're trying to accomplish. So if we're trying to accomplish together, I have to let go my own way, my own will, and see what is the greater good for this, that all of us can have the success that we're having. Strengthening race relations. And I'm so grateful to be here today, but I would encourage you, because I've seen so many times that when we get together and we talk about race relations, we talk about it in February, we talk about it, but we need to have something continual so that we can really get an understanding of how we can come up. Watch this. It's not to try to have a decision and try to decide something right now, but it's the time that we can continue to talk, and I believe as we go, we'll be made whole. Now, we're very fortunate in our county, because when there is challenges, we can go to the law enforcement, we can talk to them about situations and circumstances, but it needs to go further than that. There needs to be more of these kind of sessions that we can have a question and answering session to really get to know. We need to sit down and eat. We need to, right now we can't do too much eating, but we still eat. But we need to spend some time with each other to really get to know each other. I often say this: all of our problems are never bigger than God's power. We're talking about the believers. Keep the hope and keep the faith, because there is no hopeless situation with God. The Bible says in Ecclesiastes, the 9th chapter, 4th verse, unto them who is joined to all the living, there is hope. And an acronym from hope is heavily optimistic, perceive in. That's what we have to have when we're looking at this. Yes, it's enormous. We're having all these things that are going on. It's enormous. But we must have a heavily optimistic, perceive in. Continue to keep the hope, keep the faith. God bless you.
Thank you, Pastor Bradley. Our next speaker is Volusia County Councilwoman Barbara Gertman. As a public servant, how are you fostering inclusivity in the community when it comes to race relations, and what can we do better? So I have a little bit of a bio on you. You were elected from District 1 in 2019, and among the many organizations that Ms. Gertman has been part of, she is the Minority Elected Officials of Volusia County Board Member, the West Volusia NAACP Executive Committee, West Volusia Association of Realtors, the DeLand Chamber of Commerce, and the West Volusia Chamber of Commerce. Representative Gertman has been a licensed realtor since 2012 with several recognitions for her service and performance. She is a healthcare consultant and has a 30-year career in healthcare management roles. Ms. Gertman sows seeds of hope and faith to create a garden of unity throughout the community. I love that quote.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for this invitation. And thank you for this time of conversation about such a critical issue. Strengthening race relations and forming inclusivity today. So where I start with this is where I began, and my message to you I'm going to start with is I need you to see me, I need you to hear me, I need you to accept me and know that I value myself as I value you. So I didn't prepare a long, presentation because I am my presentation. My service to this community is my presentation, how I came to be and why I chose to serve. In my bio, it mentions that I had a 30-year healthcare career, and I stopped in 2010. And I came back home to DeLand after traveling around the nation with Johnson & Johnson. And when I came back, I saw that there were many needs in the community. My mother and father's family live in DeLand in the Spring Hill area, which is known for many challenges. And through all those years I would travel, I didn't see it. You knew things were happening, but you weren't still enough to see the realities of what was going on. And when I did, I realized, okay, it's either time to keep your eyes closed and keep moving, or it's time to make a decision to be part of a solution. But first, I looked for where the help could come from. And there were many leaders, there were many people doing many things, but you needed to add that extra reach and extension. And it was time for me to decide that I wanted to be that for our community. And what I loved about it, our community is rich in relationships. And when we get to know each other as people, many of the barriers are removed. So I really worked hard within this community for you to get to know me as Barb Gertman. I participated in my local Rotary Club. I participated in a number of different organizations and gave back and volunteered my time and might let you know that I'm showing you the love that I'm expecting back. Let you know that I wanted to hear the concerns of our community, not only Black issues, but the issues of our community as a whole, and connect with you to find out how we can make a difference. And I found the more that you got to know me and the more that I was there to support you, when I had a concern, whether it was for my community, for my family, for a need of homelessness within our community, there was an opportunity to connect. To me, that's the greatest value, is connecting one-on-one. And to me, sowing those seeds throughout our community has made a difference individually. And as we tie those together, that's how we sow the seeds of growth and connectivity throughout our community. But don't let me make you think that I'm not fully aware of the racial challenges that we have as well. And what I really respect, what I'm seeing is happening, is a new awakening, a new awareness, and a greater opportunity to speak to you and speak to you with truth, no fear, and no apologies. Because it's no longer time for us to just try to have comfortable conversations with you. Because once you get to know me and respect me and know that I'm coming to speak to you through truth and love, it's still about talking about our reality, what we live with every day. What I stand here as a mother and a grandmother of Black boys, and the truth that happens within our community. But again, I feel as you get to know me, and it's time for us to deal with these hard decisions and hear the truth. Some aren't ready to handle it, even though you do know me, right? But again, it's about planting that seed of understanding, awareness, and awakening. So right now, I'm participating in 3 committees in our community. One has to deal with arts and culture, one has to do with our business environment, and one has to do with our criminal justice system. And it's all related to the same. What I love about it, 80% of those that are leading the charge are young people and 70-year-old white men. Right? That's where the difference is. That's where that connection has to be met. And if we have a 70-year-old white man leading a conversation about racial inclusion or the inequities and the injustices, I think we're planting the right seed. If we have young people that have the energy to help move these messages, because I think a lot of us are getting tired, right? We need somebody else to move this ball. And it is the young people, right? They're not in this room right now, but again, we need to be able to pass this ball on and pass those seeds of change on into our community. And it is about connecting with those who didn't believe, didn't really connect to the message, but right now see the seeds of hope and the opportunity to make a difference throughout our community. And to me, one by one, I'm inviting people into my world and letting them get to know me as I get to know them, as they get to know that I'm coming from a place of love, but I'm also coming from a place of truth, and I'm not apologizing for being. And all I want you to do is to help us remove barriers and allow people to be who they are and who God graced them to be, without your labels, without your expectations, and without your any suppression or oppression to keep people from being able to maximize their own opportunities. To me, that's what this is all about. Just let people be. Just let everyone be and understand they have the same value and opportunity. That's the difference for me. That's why I work and stand here every day. That's why I feel like sitting on the Volusia County Council and having our public be able to see someone who looks like me, sounds like me, and comes from the place of where my heart is for community and for impacting people to make a difference one by one. So that's why I told the priest, it didn't matter to me if 2 people showed up today. If those 2 people could take on a message, right, to continue to plant the seed throughout this community, then we were doing the right thing. But I thank you for more showing up. I thank you for being here, and I thank you for this opportunity for me to share my heart and again, why I stand here, why I serve, and why I will continue to. So I thank you.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman Gertman. And now our next speaker will be Representative Webster Barnaby. And Webster Barnaby grew up in Birmingham, England, where he was born in 1959. Webster graduated from Matthew Bolton College with an Associate of Arts degree in business. He worked hard as an area housing manager before immigrating to the United States in 1987. Webster married Sylvia, and they have 2 adult children. Brittany, who graduated from the University of Florida and works as an architectural drafter in Orlando, and Adrian Joshua, who graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy in 2015 and is currently active duty in Norfolk, Virginia as a lieutenant in the communications community. Sylvia is the manager of Deltona Quest Diagnostics Labs. Webster was naturalized as a U.S. citizen on March 5, 1998. Webster served as the Deltona District 2 City Commissioner in 2012 and was elected as Florida State Representative, District 27 in November of 2020. Webster currently serves on the following committees: Insurance and Banking, Commerce, Healthcare Appropriations, Local Administrations and Veterans Affairs, Government Operations, and Criminal Justice and Public Safety. Welcome.
Good morning. Good afternoon. I want to give honor to you, Father, for being here today, to all the congregants that are here today. I am an ordained and licensed minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ, so look out. I am honored to be here today. I count it a great honor and a great privilege that the Lord has ordered my steps. Growing up in Europe, seeing many things. My parents are from the Caribbean island of Jamaica, and I'm grateful to be the son of Jamaican parents, and that I've been brought here, I believe, like Queen Esther said, for such a time as this. I've experienced many things when it comes to race relations over the years, both in Europe and in the Caribbean and here in North America. The subject this afternoon is strengthening race relations by fostering inclusivity today. And I want to give special attention to the subject matter and to the hearers that are here to let you know that I believe it's possible to do just that, to strengthen race relations by fostering inclusivity today. I am an example of inclusivity that is different from the normal. I remember in 1966 as a 7-year-old child in Birmingham, England, not Birmingham, Alabama, the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK, burnt a cross in my neighbor's yard. They were trying to intimidate the Caribbean blacks that were living in this nice neighborhood and wanted us to move out of the neighborhood. I experienced many hateful things as a child coming up, being called very derogatory names. And yet my father, who was a lance corporal in the British military, gathered all 7 of his children together in the living room. I never forgot the speech. We said, "Dad, what race are we?" He said, "Kids, there's only one race." I said, "What is it, Dad?" He says, "Human. We ain't moving. We're not going to be intimidated. There's only one race, the human race." And I've never forgotten that. It was some several years later when I had a spiritual conversion, a born-again experience, coming to know Jesus Christ as my personal Lord and Savior. And several months later, I took a trip to the Caribbean island of Jamaica. First time ever flying in an airplane outside of Europe. And in that island of Jamaica, I went to a youth convention. And there at that youth convention, I met people from all over the world until I met this special lady with her mother. And that lady's now my wife, Sylvia. And I wanted to know where they were from. And they said they were from the U.S. Virgin Islands. I said, wow, never heard of a Virgin Islands. Are there any virgins there? I know we're in church, Pastor. You give it a little levity. And her mother laughed. And she forgave me for my joke. But hey, it was an icebreaker, because 4 years later, I left England and came to the United States. And yes, it took me 11 years to become a citizen. And at one point, my green card had expired, and I received a letter that I was going to be deported because my green card had expired. That's right. And I went to see my congressman, John Micah, right here in Deltona. And he was shocked. He said, you got a college degree, you work, you got a nice family, and you're going to be deported? He says, you wait right here in my office. And this was a white man talking to me, a black man. You talk about fostering race relations. You talk about strengthening the race and inclusivity. He didn't show me any bad face. 2 hours later, he called me back and he said, we found your immigration papers. They were in Washington, D.C., buried under a pile of files. You don't have to pay the immigration lawyers any more money. You're going to become an American citizen. He says, I want you to go to the Sanford Civic Center on Tuesday, March the 5th, 1998. You're going to become an American citizen. Of course, my wife and my 2 children were home, and they were very fearful that their father was going to be deported. A lot of tears, a lot of crying. But there was a lot of rejoicing when they found out that I was going to become an American citizen. That Tuesday morning, I raised my right hand under the big American flag in the Sanford Civic Center right across from Lake Monroe. And I cried like a baby. Folks are like, why is that big black guy crying? I says, you want me to tell you my story, why I'm crying? In England, my passport says British subject. That's right. The Civil Society of Great Britain refers to its people as subjects. And I'm staying on point, Pastor. But my American passport said citizen. There's a vast difference between being a citizen versus a subject. And what I find amazing is that people who want to subjugate people, people who want to discriminate, always want you to be the lesser person. They always want to subject you to their whims and to their ways. Well, I've had a quiet confidence about me that comes from my biblical worldview. It is because of my born-again experience that has allowed me to have had supreme confidence to be elected as a city commissioner in Deltona, to be the first black man elected as the president of a Republican club in this county. And not only that, Pastor, but to be an elected official that's been elected by over 11,000 votes by most people who are not black in District 27. Dr. Coggins, I submit to you, sir, that is a first. And that didn't happen by accident, didn't happen by osmosis. I believe, like the slave Onesimus in the book of Philemon, the smallest book in the Bible, by the way, only 25 verses. But Philemon was a slave owner. The book of Philemon. Today's cancel culture would cancel him. He'd be written out of this Bible. But he owned a slave, and the slave's name was Onesimus. And Onesimus, you got to read the story, folks, was a runaway slave. He ran away from his master, Philemon. But something happened to Onesimus, and something happened to Philemon that makes this story even more important. They both had a conversion of the heart. I believe it was the late politician from Arizona who declared that you cannot legislate morality. But I believe that the oneness, the unity that this nation seeks, that the world seeks, I believe the answer is found in this book right here. It's the Bible, the Basic Instruction Before Leaving Earth, otherwise known as the Bible. But as I mentioned in the book of Philemon, is a powerful story that's there for us today to read and understand, that this slave, Onesimus, had a conversion of the heart, not of the mind, but of the heart. One of my Jamaican heroes, Robert Nesta Marley, known to people as Bob Marley, said we must emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. I believe one of the biggest sticking points today to the unity and the oneness that we all seek is mental slavery. I'm in church, but I would say stinking thinking. You all get the point, right? As a man thinks in his heart, Pastor Bradley, the scripture said, so is he. I would submit to you that the heart is the most important organ in the body. For out of the heart are the issues of life. So the scriptures always tell us that eyes have not seen and ears hasn't heard, neither has it entered into the heart of man the things that God has prepared for him. God has prepared some wonderful things for this beautiful community here in Volusia County. I'm so proud to see my friend Vicki Wales here today. This lady has been a tremendous supporter of mine. And Dr. Coggins, I honor you, sir. You are one of my heroes. I'm so proud of Father Frank and this Catholic community that I love so much. My neighbors that live next to me, one of them is here working in the soup kitchen, Miss Linda Davidson. We're all God's children. God don't make no junk. It's important for us to recognize that we're all part of a greater community. There's one God, one Lord, and one faith for all. And I'm honored to serve in Tallahassee on these important committees where decisions will be made. But except the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain that builds it. And I acknowledge today before you that wisdom comes from the Lord. So I'm in constant prayer for God to grant me the wisdom to serve, to foster, and to strengthen relationships with people all across the great state of Florida, to make Florida better, to ensure that our law enforcement and all our agencies are working with every community, that no person is left behind, that we are all our brother's keepers. And I can promise you as a lawmaker that I will always put God first. I believe the scriptures tell us that leaders are God's ministers. Didn't call them politicians. See, the Greek word for politician is hypokritika. Hypokritika in the Greek means actors. It's time for all the actors to exit stage left. We need leaders with a heart that will love people, that are principled, whether you're working in the county or the city or the state or in the federal government. It's critical that we foster the right race relationships. And you have my commitment and my resolve that I'm going to work together with this community. I have an office that's opened on Enterprise Road, right next to the tag office, next to Williams Flooring Center. It's 2730 Enterprise Road. It's placed strategically to serve District 27. I came last night from Tallahassee. I have to go back tomorrow. I have very important meetings all week. I'm sequestered there for 60 days. But I want you to know that I love people. I want you to know that I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the love of God that passes all understanding. It's the love of God that led people, I believe, to vote for me. It's led people who never voted for me to recognize and understand that they come up to me and says, Representative Barnaby, we love you. We appreciate your spirit. And that's what's going to take to continue to foster greatness in our country. It's reaching out. It's sharing the love of God. We can't solve all the world's problems. There is evil in the world. It's very sad, I know. I wish it wasn't there, but it's there. But as long as I'm here, I'm going to be a light and a lighthouse for you. I am my brother's keeper. I love you all. Thank you, and God bless you. I'm looking forward to hearing more from this conference. Thank you, Father.
Thank you, Representative Barnaby. And now we have our next two panelists are from our own parish. Vicki Wiley is originally from Chicago. She retired from the Chicago Tribune in 1995. She was a member of the Chicago Police Auxiliary, worked with Congressman John Lewis, Gus Savage, Charles Hayes, and Mayor Harold Washington, whose campaign she worked on. Vicki organized a bus to Washington, D.C., seeking reinstatement of pension security for the Southeast Chicago Steelworkers. She also was a member and organizer for the United Neighborhood Organizers of Southeast Chicago. She worked with the South Shore Commission to help stem gang violence and crime in her community. She also worked with the Chicago chapter for the March on Washington, at which Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke. Locally, Vicki worked on the campaign to elect Lucille Wheatley for District 1 here in Deltona. Welcome.
Thank you, Father. Good evening, afternoon, everyone. I've been a member, I'm Vicki Whaley's, and I've been a member of this parish since 1997. And as Father said, I grew up in Chicago. I had two wonderful parents, my mom and dad. My mom was German and Dutch, and my father was Ethiopian. And I learned at an early age with my three brothers what racism is. In 1939, we were in World War II. In 1945, when it ended, I was 10 years old. And my mother would often talk of the atrocities of Adolf Hitler and his racist views to destroy the world. If you weren't white, blonde hair, and blue-eyed, you weren't worth anything. And my father often spoke of the racism here in the United States. And I remember him telling us that he could never visit his friends and family in the South because our mother was white. And if he was there with her, he would be lynched. So, having that in my mind, there in 1955, I was 20 years old, and a young boy from Chicago named Emmett Till went to visit his grandfather in Money, Mississippi. He went to a store and allegedly whistled at a white woman and was brutally killed. Beaten, you couldn't recognize him. They came to his house 2 or 3 days later. The goons, the racist goons, came to his house, took him from his grandfather and killed him and threw him in the river. When they recovered his body, his grandfather could only recognize a ring that he had on his finger. When they brought him back home to Chicago in a wooden box that was nailed shut, his mother demanded that they open it, and she had pictures taken from Jet magazine because there were no other photographers or newspapers that wanted to cover the story. And that's when I was at the funeral. His mother wanted the coffin open. She wanted the world to see, and that was terrible. To this day, I have that image. That's when I joined with Dr. King, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and that's when I became active in the movement. 1965 was the Bloody Sunday. That's when Dr. King called for a march because a young activist by the name of Lee Jackson was shot in the stomach by Alabama state troopers. Just a peaceful protest. When Dr. King called for that march, for some reason, Dr. King was late and he couldn't get to the march on time. And there was a young man at the time, John Lewis, and Hosea Williams, who led the march. We were marching from a church in Selma, Alabama, across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And that's where we were met with the most furious hatred you could imagine. They beat us, they tear gassed us, they put the dogs on us, and to this day I have a scar on my left ankle where the dogs attacked us. Then they beat John Lewis so he almost lost his life, and that was called Bloody Sunday. I'll never forget that. I guess it was about maybe weeks later, we attempted that march again to confront Governor Wallace, who declared segregation forever. So under the protection of then Lyndon Johnson, we marched again. And I believe it was the 1965, the Voting Rights Act was signed as a, well, I don't know what you would call it, but it was the Voting Rights Act. I guess this was an appeasement for us to have equal rights to vote. And my mother would always say that if you see racism and you're quiet and you're silent, you are consented that it was okay. And my father would often talk when the war was going on about the segregation in the United States with our armed forces, where you had your white troops here and your colored or troops of color, and you were fighting for the same thing. You were fighting for the country, but yet you weren't good enough to be together. I also was involved with when I met my husband, when I met my late husband, he was political. He was campaign manager for congressmen, senators, judges, and I got involved on the political end. And it was 1983, after Richard Daley, old man, we called him Old Man Daley. After Old Man Daley passed, we had two terrible mayors, Michael Bolandic and Jane Byrne. And after we got her out of office, there was an activist in Chicago by the name of Lou Palmer. And he had a saying, "We shall see in '83." And that's when we elected Harold Washington, mayor of Chicago, which was unheard of. And when I went to work the next day, because Tuesday was election day, when I was working at the Chicago Tribune, you could hear a pin drop because there was no joy with the bosses, and it was Harold, and Harold was not white. So Gus Savage, who was our congressman in the 2nd Congressional District in Chicago, and my husband was he worked in his campaign. He was the director of the campaign, and he was also worked with the chief. He was like the chief of staff. And Gus had a little saying that the United States government is a reverse Robin Hood. Gus said that all the time, where the government would take from the poor and give to the rich. And it's like it's still going on. It's still going on today. But I believe, I have faith, and I believe that this is going to change. We will have a change, because James Baldwin said that not everything in this world can be changed, but it can be worked on. There is more ahead of us than was behind us. And racism affects the quality of life for everyone. In my way of thinking, what we can do, everybody's not going to march, everybody's not going to protest, but what you can do is vote. And you can vote for men and women who have your interest at heart, that's going to work for you. You don't have to be concerned of Washington. Well, you do, but you should be concerned what's in your district, your mayor, your council, your state reps, your police chief. It's a sheriff here. It's the police in North, but it's your sheriff here. And we're fortunate because we have Mike Chitwood, and I helped Mike in his campaign, and I asked him, we were at the Masonic Lodge a couple of months ago, the first of the year, and I asked him how was the morale of his officers since this Michael Floyd situation. And he told me that they're having classes for the deputies. So that was, to me, that was promising. And also, racism, it begins at home, when you teach your children. We have young children. If you notice kids, and they're playing, they're not looking at anyone's color and how they look or where they're from. They're playing, they're kids. But when you hear your parents with these racist rants they have, you grow up with that, and you teach your children. That's how you're teaching your children. So we can start, and we can start right now, and we can tell ourselves that nobody is better than anyone else, because my mother said that the color of your skin should not make you a target. Mother always said that. And things are changing, because just a few weeks ago on the news, I heard one of the newscasters do a story on a woman of color, Mary Jackson, who worked at NASA. She was an engineer. A few years ago, you wouldn't hear anything about anything like that, a woman of color having any, not even a job, but this woman was an engineer. And we're fortunate living here in Deltona with Father Chris and Father Frank, and I have often heard them in our gospel speaking of racism. In fact, I talked to Father Chris about one of the gospels that he had, and I was telling him stories of how racism has affected my life. And in Deltona, this is a diverse community. When I moved here, it was mainly a bedroom senior community. But Deltona's changing, and I believe it's, 95,000, almost close to 100,000 now. And there are young people that are moving in with families, and I believe the average age is 35 to 40. So we do have a lot of work ahead of us, but if each of us can have in our hearts, and we profess that we love God and the Lord Jesus Christ, if we have in our hearts that we are going to love our neighbor, be kind, treat everyone like you want to be treated. And I commend Father Chris and Father Frank and the ministry, the Culture of Life, to put on a forum such as this, because if they care enough about this community to do this, I hope this is not the last one. And I am proud to be a part of it, and I thank you.
Thank you, Vicki. And you're right, I heard your story and I said, oh my gosh, I really want to hear more. And so then right around that same time is when we decided, the Culture of Life Committee at least, decided to host this forum on race. And I thought, wow, this is a great opportunity for us to hear each other. As many of our speakers today said, we've got to listen to one another. And so we have one more, Gregory Rampersad, who was born in Trinidad in 1952, migrated to Brooklyn in 1973, married to Lenora for 41 years, has 7 children, 15 grandchildren, was a computer programmer, now retired, and active in various church ministries. So we welcome you, Gregory, and just a recent recovery from COVID, too.
Good evening, everyone. Father Chris, Father Frank, fellow parishioners, austere leaders. I feel very humble, first of all, to be in your presence and to hear your stories and to listen to the experiences that you went through. I was asked to give my experiences in racism as a parishioner, and what have I experienced growing up, and what do I see in this parish, and what we could do to alleviate that. As my brief bio said, I was born in 1952 in the island of Trinidad and Tobago. A little history on Trinidad and Tobago, because I feel it's very important. We had the indigenous Indians, And then because of wars of conquest, you had the island being colonized by the Spanish, the French, the British, and somehow the Lebanese and the Syrians got in there. At the end, it was the British that had the control of Trinidad at the time. And what was happening was the island was rich in farming cane and tobacco, and the colonists didn't want to do it themselves, hence the slavery was born, and they brought the Africans from Africa to farm the land. In 1838, when slavery was abolished in the Caribbean, again, the Europeans didn't want to farm the land, so they came up with another system called indentured laborship. And this is where the British, again, because they had conquered China and parts of Africa and India, they brought the Indians down from India, dangling a carrot again, luring them and the Chinese. So at that time, you had this mixture, this potpourri of people in the island. When I was born, there was a difference of the situation in Trinidad as opposed to what's in America. In America, you have minorities and a large Caucasian group. In Trinidad, it was the reverse. The Caucasians were the minority. Hence, they were the ones who had to adjust to the culture and the society, primarily led by the Africans and the Indians. Having said that, in growing up, I grew up as a Catholic, and those of you from the Caribbean who were Catholic and with the British, you would know that every primary school that was Catholic had a Catholic church. I went to Sacred Heart Roman Catholic school, and the church was Sacred Heart that I went to. My higher learning, I went to the College of the Immaculate Conception, St. Mary's College, and I was taught by the priest from the Holy Ghost Orders family. So I had a very heavy-rooted Catholicism in me. Having said that, growing up, I can't recall racism or being aware of racism. For me, it didn't exist, because when you went to school, you represent your school. In team sports, it could be anybody you play with or your teammates. They were also your friends. Some invited you to their homes. You invited others to their homes. As teammates, we shared the same environment. We didn't have buses to take us anywhere, so parents would carpool. And we all got along very good. What I did recognize was that there were three groups of people: the haves, the have-nots, and the ones in between. But as a young person, that meant nothing to me. I didn't have responsibilities and so forth. Fast forward to 1973. I came over from England. I was living in England, in London for a while, going to school, doing computer programming. And I came over in 1973, and I migrated to Flatbush, Brooklyn, a dense cosmopolitan area of West Indians, and I felt at home. I had my food, the culture, I played soccer, the same teammates and so forth. But there was a difference, because now I have responsibilities and I'm working. And when I go to work, the majority of the people are non-black. And the funny thing is, when we were speaking, and you know, people will refer to the Italian-American guy, the Jewish-American guy, the Russian-American guy. But when they refer to African American, they would say the black. The black. And that stirred up something in me. You know, why was that so? But it didn't affect me directly. So I didn't pay it a whole lot of attention. But that was the beginning of my awareness of racism. Now, racism isn't necessarily black versus white. There is racism amongst whites. There's racism amongst blacks. I remember a black American told me, he says, what it is with you Caribbean guys? You come up here and you take away our jobs and then you build your houses and you go to Long Island, you know? What I found out was that the people who were telling me this were people who were living on the government subsistence and making that a way of life. So it wasn't just black against white. However, in 1986, there were 3 young men who were looking for help. Their car had broken down. And they wandered into an area that were primarily Italian-American and Irish-American, Howard Beach. And the young men wandered in there, and they got into an altercation with some of the young men in the pizzeria. They were trying to make a phone call for help. And they were beaten. 2 of them were severely beaten and chased out. And one of them, while trying to cross a busy highway, was struck by a car and killed. His name was, he was from Trinidad, Michael Griffith. And apparently the justice system wasn't doing what they were supposed to do. They were getting a raw deal. And a protest march was organized. I'm not sure if it was by Reverend Sharpton, but it was organized, and we were going this morning, Saturday, into Howard Beach and protest. Now, the things that I knew about these protest marches were what I saw on television with the Howard, the Till situation and so forth. And I got there, and when I got there and everybody's gathering around, I'm seeing the venom of the young white men. They had baseball bats, they had 2x4s, and they were being verbal abusive, I think to instigate something. And while I was marching and I locked arms and we were walking, and I seen the venom and so forth, I started to say a prayer. I said, Lord, if you get me out of here, I wouldn't sin anymore. You know, that's the fear that was in me, you know. And we're going, you know, and so the arms were locked, but rather loosely. But then I felt the grip tightening on both sides, and I didn't understand why. As I was going, it hit me straight between the eyes. Nigger, get out of here. Now, I've heard the word before, and I've heard it by other people, and I've heard it by blacks referring to blacks, and that's one of our problems. When we are angry because we are referred to as nigger by non-blacks, it would never end. The word nigger will never end, and it would never have the impact until blacks stop using it towards one another. Anyway, when that hit me, the feeling of fear started to change, and it became one of anger. And that anger, afterwards, and I thought about it, the locking of the arms and the tightening was both one of fear, but one of not wanting to give in to what they were trying to do, incite something there. And when I got out of the march, I never told my wife where I went and what I was doing. When I got home, I got an earful, but deservedly so. And I started to read books. I read books, The Wretched of the Earth, Kafir boy, it was all about how white colonialists were treating the blacks and the Indians and so forth. And when I read these books, I didn't read it subjectively. I mean, I didn't read it objectively, I read it subjectively, and I became very angry. And the happy-go-lucky, easygoing Gregory who got along with everyone started to change. I was no longer respectful to my white neighbor. When I got on the platform for the subway, some of the white people who were friendly with me, hi, good morning, I didn't answer them, and I started to change. And the sad part about that change is that I started to become what I hated. And it was brought to my attention by a young lady, a young white lady. And I looked back and it was true. I was becoming something that was disgusting. Now, this young lady, she was a young computer programmer, and I used to help her as she came on the job. And one of the things that we had in common was a love for the New York Knicks basketball team. And so after work, we'll go to the Madison Square Garden and watch basketball. And she was one of 7 sisters. And she was a very, very nice person, to me anyway. And she helped me get away from that hatred that was festering in me and helped me to come back to who I was. Now, in 1992, I left New York and I came to Deltona de Barry. And when I came here somewhat arrogant because I came here with my New York salary. I just closed on a house, bought a car, everything was going great. But after 6 months, my contract as a programmer expired and it wasn't renewed. And my finances dwindled. And I went through a period of 7 months where I felt God was humbling me. I turned to government assistance. At the church here, I went to the St. Vincent de Paul. I went to Catholic Charities to help with my electric bill and so forth. And it was as though God was trying to get my attention, take away my New York lifestyle from me. Came here, knew no one, so the popularity went. Now I don't have a job. I don't have that New York salary. And so it became a struggle. And I learned to beg, humble myself. But what I learned is when God called me to be like his son, Jesus Christ, I had to first empty myself of myself so I could make room for him to come into me. And that was the emptying of myself. Now, I'm not saying I'm there. I'm not saying I'm totally empty. You know, we still have that concupiscence that pulls us back every so often. But I'm getting there. And I'm getting there because there was a program here, Christ Renews Parish Retreat. And I attended those retreats at different levels. And I have found some beautiful brothers. And when I don't use this word very loosely, but when I say I love them, I love them. In this parish, I met some wonderful sisters. I love them. In my ministries, I do RCIA. I prep people who want to come into the Roman Catholic Church. A few years ago, I was working with an elderly Chinese couple. I didn't speak Mandarin and they struggled with English. And we got them through the program and they came into the Catholic Church. Except for the birth, witnessing the birth of my children, there was no greater joy than to see those couple come into the Catholic Church and the joy that they had. The gentleman asked me to be his sponsor. To this day, he calls me his godfather. He asked me to be the witness at his wedding. Most beautiful. We could get rid of racism. We can. Because with God, all things are possible. It's possible. But we have to stop seeing color. We have to stop seeing the Spanish, the French, whatever. Jesus asked us to be his light in this earth. We cannot be his light if we have these things still sheltering the baskets still covering that light. We have to get rid of ourselves. And when we look at one another, we should see Jesus in that individual. That is the solution. Is it easy? I'm not saying it's easy. But if we're going to say that we're Christians and we love God, first love one another. Thank you.
Thank you, Gregory. Now we have an opportunity for you to ask any questions of any of our panelists. We invite our panelists to please come forward and have a seat in the sanctuary. And then if there's others that would like to share or ask a question from any of our panelists, please feel free to do so at this time. Yes.
Hi, my name is Tim Wood, member of the church here. Speaking with my wife a lot about racism and things are. My perspective is certainly different than everyone else's in this room. Maybe not significantly with me, but certainly different. We all have our experiences and we build them. What I've been wondering is if there, one of the speakers mentioned 70-year-old white man. Well, I'm 68. Almost there.
Close enough.
But where will I be when I'm 70? Will it be significantly different, or will I be an influencer to others, just as you mentioned?
Let me see. Good.
One of the things that I struggle with is perspective. And like today, we read of two instances. One was, or three. One was the young lady who spoke at the inaugural. We saw that article too. Another was something that happened in a restaurant in Orlando, just yesterday, I believe. And another was a situation. Nevertheless, as we talked about it, we realized that our perspectives might be different than others. And where we first raise airs about a situation, and then we start picking apart, peeling the onions apart, what have you, and perspective changes. But how do I get, the question is this, there is a question. How do I get a better sense of what is sensitivity? And how do I get a better sense of what is a proper way to influence without creating more problems? I heard the speakers talk sometimes about, well, there's this and that, and then we as a people need to come together. And that's, in some ways, it's just a nice way of saying the white people need to get better. And they do. So that's fine, but you didn't say, you said the people. And the people is a better way to say that. That's a sensitivity issue. That's what I'm talking about. So how do we get trained to be better, more sensitive, so that we can be better influences? If we go to school, like the school that you teach, we can be a student, join those classes or what have you. But is there any other way that might be able to bring this to a more rapid sensitivity? That's my question.
Okay, let me take a
Please,
shot
Dr.
at
Pines.
that. there are basically four ways you can look at this situation. The first thing is to recognize that there is a problem. It's very, very difficult for people to recognize that they're still being pain inflicted by both parties. Right here in Florida, we have 78 groups. Right in Samsula, right in Deltona, right in DeLand, and as you go further, Orlando, etc. We got to recognize that the problem exists. The second thing is we are afraid to talk about it. We need to engage in what the church is doing today. Sermons should be devoted to engaging and talking about it, because it's a crisis. It's a crisis. How we know it's a crisis? We're seeing the increase. It's going back. When people say make America great, they want to go back to Jim Crow and segregation, etc. And then the third thing, I always say start with one person. All of us say, come and talk to me. We talk to each other. We're not talking to each other. We're talking at each other, and we're reading at each other. And then the last thing is something when I was studying the Mahat, and the fact that Moses was influenced by that before he wrote the Ten Commandments. One of the things, and you heard me said it, you got to clean up inside. Because what you think inside, what you feel inside, is what you behave. And you can say, I love people, but if you don't feel it inside, then your behavior would not be connected with it.
Any other comments from our panel? Yes.
And I generally reference 70-year-old white men because it's kind of a bridge, right? For me, what I see in the community as far as how the wealth and how things are distributed and where the greater pushback is from that kind of generation, that generational piece between, somewhere between 60 and 80, right? And we're at a time where there's a real fear of what this change means, especially for that generation. So when 70-year-old white people, or men especially, are at the table, that means to me that we're bridging greater opportunity. Because again, that's where a lot of the wealth is held, but it's also where a lot of the pushback and the challenges from that generation lie. So, but in regards to your question, I think you standing up and asking the question is the first step. I think you removing any fear and any barriers, and what I say is, let me in your world and come into mine, and let's get to know each other on that level without barriers. And the more you get to know and understand people, a lot of that stuff can kind of move out the way. So when you meet the next person, you approach that person without the filter. Because I think that's what we've got to remove. We've got to remove that filter that we have a preconceived notion of someone, something, and what we think in our mind then becomes what that person is, does, or thinks. And rarely is it true, right? So there is a fear of black men. There just is. Whether you're a policeman with a gun, whether you're a white woman walking down the street or in the elevator, I mean, these are realities of a filtered experience, whether it's from a TV, whether it's whatever that is. But when you get to know somebody, right, and you don't limit it to just the people that you play sports with, right, because you put them in a box too, right? Well, those are the guys we play sports with. But those guys then don't relate to the other people you meet on the street the next day. So understand, we all have to take personal responsibility, accountability to begin our own awareness and awakening. And whatever that means to you, whether that means educating yourself more, or if you're someone, again, connect to some of these organizations that's working on these concerns and kind of get in where you fit in, because everything's not for everybody at the same time, right? So you get into the environment, like I said, whether it's the arts, whether it's the criminal justice, whether it's the business element, whatever part fits into your life can be improved by greater economics, by being more open, inclusive, and welcoming to all, right? The same thing with the arts, the same thing with the criminal justice, and us making those changes to improve the quality of life for everyone. So I think hard discussions, but necessary.
Pastor.
You said earlier, this is the first step. I just want to share some things that we have done, as we embrace the idea of forward progress in these racial challenges that we have. And today, once again, we commend your father for actually having this setting here. Not last year, but in 2019, another pastor friend of mine, Dr. Bob Mulkey, his church, New Covenant Church in DeLand, we go back a long way. We started about a year or so ago talking about the challenges, racially and socially, that we have in our country. And so what we decided to do is that once a month, we have on a Wednesday night a fellowship to where his congregation from DeLand came to our facility in Deltona, and we had food, and we sat down to tables where you had different individuals, different congregations, and you're talking about a night of hope and encouragement, and we had questions to really dialogue, and relationship from that started. So when you're talking about, where can we start, you're right. You can't change everybody. You can't control everybody, but I believe once you create this climate of just like today, and then have other times to come together to really, people who are interested, and the more you have this understanding of the focus, you'll begin to be sensitive to, and believe it or not, it's just not one way. I mean, our people in our congregation are so excited, his people, and it does something. You're talking about healing would take place, and then the hope would just rise up, because now there is a climate to where we are really talking, and it's designed to ask questions, and the communication is so real. And we finish, and we go home, and we go to their church, they come to our church. Like I said, it was a couple of years ago we started that, but we couldn't do it last year. But just events or activities like this would begin to cultivate the climate that you really need. But you're right. Like I said, we embrace the idea of progress. We got to engage in processes, and there are a lot of processes. That's not just one thing. There are a lot of processes that we can do to really help move us toward getting this understanding, and just communicating with each other. It's not always dealing with we just getting together and just talking. And then the conversation will it will lead you where you need to go. And I believe you will get blessed in that setting.
You have a question, Diane?
Yeah. Hi, Diane Holton. I think you kind of already answered this, but I'll ask it though. Either collectively or in your individual work, what do any of you think would be a logical next step to a forum like this? And/or, since I'm going to write this for the paper, those that weren't here, what message do you want Volusia County residents to get out of this, since it's probably going to go to a lot of folks that will read about it? So either of those, collective, what's the next step from this? And/or what message do you want folks to get that weren't here?
Can I try to take President?
Please.
So I serve as one of the Board of Trustees for, I believe, one of the most diverse churches in the entire Volusia County area. That's Trinity Assembly of God on El Cam Boulevard. I'm the former president for Trinity Assembly of God School, and also former board member for the school. We have the most diverse church at Trinity Assembly of God, and the most diverse board of directors. with a church where we have thousands of members here in the city of Deltona, and over 92 missionaries across the world, and churches that we've built and established all across the Caribbean and Central and South America. And it is, to me, a slice of heaven on earth. And we didn't do it by trying to legislate groups to be there at the church, simply because of the message and the word. I was referring, as I was speaking, about the slave Onesimus, and the fact that his master, Philemon, has an entire book in the Bible. A guy that was a slave owner is actually listed as one of the 66 books in the scriptures. I don't think anybody's ever recognized that. I've never heard of it. But I'm amazed that God, in his wisdom, understands that slavery is not right, yet in the permissive will of God, for many theologians, you understand where I'm going with this. There are many things that happen in this world that we will never be able to fully understand or comprehend or control. What we have to do, as Councilwoman Gertman said, is be the best you that you are today. And, you know, I always tell people, you go where you are appreciated. Never go where you're tolerated. Because if people are just tolerating you, you're in a bad spot. But if people appreciate you, and you know they appreciate you, you don't mind being around those folks.
That's true.
But when folks are just tolerating you, their body language gives it away, their eyes gives it away, they barely want to speak to you. I mean, I got stopped in D-Land in the parking lot of the Sanborn Center on a beautiful afternoon in a coat and tie, dressed real nice, and it was a gentleman driving a Mercedes-Benz. He must have been one of those 60 to 80-year-olds Gertman talked about. Because he pulled down his window and he said, "Get out of the way, nigger." And I said, "Excuse me, sir, what did you just say?" He said, "I don't talk to niggers." Now, I'm dressed real nice. In my mind, I was trying to process this older guy. Something's wrong with him. But I'm looking at the car, I'm looking at the guy, I'm like, this is crazy. This is demonic. And I had to stay in character and remain calm. Because the old me, BC, before Christ, I want to drag him out of the car. But thank God for AD, after Christ. Because I was able to hold my character in check. So these things are real, these things do happen. But there are congregations in our community that have decided that they don't want to live that way. They want to live right. They want to be in communion with each other. And again, I commend this church. I thank God for Father Frank and Father Chris and the folks here. You are just beautiful people. And like I said, one of the greatest saints of all was St. Paul. And St. Paul, to me, he nailed it in the book of Philemon. For those of you who don't know it, go home and look up the book of Philemon, because the Apostle Paul, he don't make no mistake. God don't make no mistake. And he was the greatest of all to me. All right, thank you.
A couple of things. There's the law of proximity. Sounds kind of fancy, but what it basically means, you cannot solve a problem in iCloud. You have to come face to face or closer together, because then you can see in the eyes, you can hear, you can communicate, you can see the nonverbal, because 70% of our communication is nonverbal. So I believe that what we need to do as a nation, which we did in the 60s, in the height of the civil rights movement, churches and groups were getting together and talking about how we can make a better world. What happened in the 70s? You had women's rights. You had Title 1972 Title VII, all of the rights for women, as well as rights for affirmative action, etc. The other thing that I discovered, we know this now factually, and one of the panelists said it, kids learn to hate by 3rd grade. Way they learn it, not just hate, discriminate, etc. They're learning it in homes, they're learning it from each other. So one of the things we have in the state is Florida Statute 1003.42, which requires we teach who are the groups who are being hated. Jews, the statute requires we teach about the contribution of Jews from K through 12. By the time they get to me, I'll finish them off and clean them up at the college level. It requires you to teach about African and African Americans so that people understand that Africans were contributors when the Europeans came to their country. And since they've been here, they built Europe with all the sugar cane and the rum and all the other stuff. It talks about teaching about Hispanic Latino. Why? Because I have friends who are my complexion and they're Cuban, and people call them black. So we gotta look at non-European folks as well as European folks. And the other statute requires we talk about women. We would have never gone to the moon unless some women did the mathematical calculations. So I think women are smart, okay? But you gotta teach this at an early age. And notice I didn't say black women, I said women. So I think that we can shape the future by doing what we did in the 60s. In the height of the civil rights movement, we came together, we talked, we shared, we planned for a better world. And the last thing, a psychologist from Harvard said, hate becomes a mental illness because you're always what? Uptight. You're worried about somebody. I'm not worried about my neighbor, except to make sure they have food and they're safe, etc. But I'm not spending time planning how to hate them. And that's what happens when you don't understand each other. You spend a lot of time planning, it impacts your mental health, it impacts who you are.
Sir, I think we have time for maybe just one more question.
Directed at Dr. Coggins, but everyone's welcome to answer. I just wanted you to talk a little bit about the difference between economic privilege and white privilege. So many people hear white privilege lobbed as a buzzword that they say, well, that couldn't possibly exist. So I just wondered if you talk a little bit about the difference and why we shouldn't use economic privilege to dismiss white privilege.
Okay, but let's put it in context. One of the big issues economically, and let me also give you an antidote. We know that economics matter because when we had the bus boycott, okay, everybody said we don't want to lose money. Let them ride to the front of the bus. We still gonna dislike them. Rosa Parks, okay? So the message when we talk about economics is that African descent peoples, which include Caribbean, as well as those born here, African Americans and so on, contribute almost $2.3 trillion to the economy from spending and their contribution, buying houses and so on and so forth. So they're part of the economy. Secondly, I think that one of the things we also have to look is one of fairness and equity. African Americans make about 68 cents on the dollar for the same job because of the historic. Women are in a similar boat, they make about 80 cents on the dollar. So when we talk about economic privilege, what we're talking about, how can we be fair? How can we have a balance? If I have the same degrees, you have the same degrees, we should be paid the same thing, okay? So the big challenge as we go forward is how can we have a balance, how can we have fairness, so that when we look at economic distribution in our society, in our community, we're making sure that everybody is getting a fair thing. And let me tell you something. I pay less in taxes the more money I make than when I was making 10,000. There is something wrong. There's something wrong with the economics. And what we have to push for is how can we make sure that everybody comes to the middle? Because if they're in the middle, that means they're doing much better. And churches does not have to spend so much time trying to help this population that is struggling.
Yeah, that's very true. Yes.
Also, too, I think when it comes to strengthening race relationships, also too is leadership, leaders, and I know in our community right now, especially in DeLand, there are pastors getting together now and talking about reconciling and also working together. It starts with leadership. And one of the things I think, and I know there are other organizations, we just need to know the organizations that are really focused on strengthening race relationship. And you'll find that there are other organizations, other congregations with the same mindset of what can we do to really bridge this gap that we have. And so I think it'll be a blessing to really find out the other organizations that are, having that conversation about race relations. But I know, our congregation with other churches, but also too, I know there's a group of pastors in the DeLand area that we've been meeting, and we're getting one-on-one, and we even had we did it at Sanborn Center last year. We came together, and there was a time of repenting, and of course, they had individuals to actually share some of their experience, and we prayed. Talking about an awesome fellowship, and we're going to continue to have times of coming together as we continue to strengthen our relationships. So we can find out other organizations who is interested in cultivating this climate for forward progress.
And two last things I want to mention. I am one of 4 non-sheriffs that serves on the 67 Sheriffs organization and work with them. And what was interesting, I asked them the question, why did you select me? You know what they said? We select you for your brain, because you're a thinker. When each human being is treated for being a human being, rather than whether they're black, white, brown, etc., it really makes a big difference. Mm-hmm. Good.
I mainly wanted to say we need to be the change that we want to see in somebody else, right? And Representative Barnaby said, go where you're celebrated, not tolerated. And if I did that, I wouldn't be sitting here. I had to press myself to be in places where it wasn't comfortable for me, to make people comfortable with me, to understand why I'm there, what I'm fighting for, the reasons and the seeds that I'm trying to plant. So no, it wasn't comfortable, right? It wasn't comfortable going to the Rotary Club that blacks weren't at one point, even allowed to be a member of, right? And there's still a lot of those attitudes, but again, people got to know me, got to accept me as I'm volunteering and standing right next to them doing the work. It's a different mindset. Oh, that's Barb, and Barb's gonna connect you to other seeds throughout this community, because there's many more Barbs, and those that aren't Barbs are somebody else that has a different perspective. Lastly, I wanted to share with you, last weekend there was a group, Volusia Remembers. Yeah. And it's about remembrance, it's about reconciliation and healing, and recognizing previous lynchings in Volusia County. So again, there are groups, and again, that's led by a group of Stetson professors, and you know, a very diverse group throughout our community who, again, are acknowledging the need for awareness, awakening, and moving forward with healing and progress, and not forcing anything down anybody's throat. It's telling you, meet us where you are, right? The fact that you're here is that you're open, you want to know more, you want to do more, and do that in your way. And you say, how do you move forward? For me, again, it's one-on-one, it's planting that seed. It's what message do you give at home? What message do you give in your environment when you know somebody is being or making racist comments or making other people uncomfortable? That's what I say to those that I sit on the board with, right? What are you saying at home? I hear what you're saying to me when I'm sitting here looking at you. But when you go home or when you go in your environment or you're in uncomfortable situations, how are you responding to that? And that's what you have to internalize and work through, right? How do you get that strength and courage and be bold enough, right, to stand in your truth if you're really about making a difference and being the change that you want to represent? And those are the challenges I find myself in all the time, right? Not comfortable, but if you're going to lead or you're going to stand, you know, it's your time. You know, God's graced us to be who we are, so allow people to do that and give them room to do that. So I thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Yes, I would like to thank all of our panel members, and also for all of you for being here, and for those who are viewing us online. We'll also have a, yeah, well, let's do applause. That's good. Yeah. We will have this archive will be able to be viewed again by others, perhaps who were not able to be here today, so you can tell folks to go on our website to get that. Also, I'd like to thank our Culture of Life Committee, Michelle Wallace Chin, Margarita Feuerbacher, Jeff Kuznicki, Sonia Berger. We thank our panelists, Dr. Patrick Coggins, County Councilmember Barbara Gertman, Vicki Wiles, Webster Bundy, and Gregory Ramperstan, Renee Story, and all those who have participated in any way to make this happen. This was a great effort by a lot of folks. And also, I don't want to forget to also say that we have our soup to go in their parish center, or the social hall, that's available to us after this particular gathering. And you can certainly pick up your soup and enjoy a wonderful lunch today. And I think we also have Michelle and Father will hand out some certificates of appreciation for each of our members that are here today.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
On behalf of the Pastoral Council, I wish to thank the Culture of Life Committee, Father Frank, Father Chris, and all of those who are here today. As a show of our appreciation, we have some tokens to give so that you can remember us and remember that we have started this conversation and that it's only the beginning. We'd like to invite Dr. Coggins to come forward. Pastor William Bradley. Councilman Barb Gertman. Or Representative Webster Barnamy. And our own parishioners, Vicki Wiles. And last but not least, Gregory Rampersad.
In 2018, the bishops of the United States addressed this issue of race in their document titled Open Wide Our Hearts, a pastoral letter against racism. At the end of that letter, they included a prayer that is appropriate for our time together today. So let us pray. Mary, friend and mother to all, Through your Son, God has found a way to unite himself to every human being, called to be one people, sisters and brothers to each other. We ask for your help in calling on your Son, seeking forgiveness for the times when we have failed to love and respect one another. We ask for your help in obtaining from your Son the grace we need to overcome the evil of racism and to build a just society. We ask for your help in following your Son so that prejudice and animosity will no longer infect our minds or hearts, but will be replaced with a love that respects the dignity of each person. Mother of the Church, the Spirit of your Son Jesus warms our hearts. Pray for us. Amen. Again, thank you all. God bless you, and have a great rest of your day.